The room was vast, far larger than anything the human could have imagined. The council chamber stood at the heart of a colossal alien station, orbiting a star far from Earth. Towering columns, each adorned with strange alien symbols, stretched upward, seemingly endless. The walls were transparent, offering a breathtaking view of a galaxy teeming with stars and distant planets. But despite the grandeur of the setting, the human delegation felt like insects in the presence of these ancient beings. The other species seated around the enormous circular table were a sight to behold. One alien, its body composed of shimmering, amorphous energy, hovered near the center, its form constantly shifting. Another, a massive being with multiple sets of wings and eyes, emitted a low hum that vibrated through the chamber. A third appeared as little more than a floating skull, its bony visage illuminated by a faint blue glow. Each species was unique, each more intimidating than the last. At the far end of the table, the human delegates stood, clad in formal attire that looked primitive compared to the creatures seated before them. The humans had been invited to this council, yes, but only because their technology had reached a point where they could no longer be ignored. Faster than light travel, albeit crude compared to other species, had earned them a place, though not one earned through respect. The grand leader of the council, a being known only as the Arbiter, rose to speak. His voice was a deep resonance, each word a heavy echo that filled the room with gravity. "We welcome you, humans, to the Galactic Council," he intoned, his tone cool and calculated. "Your species has shown promise, though you are still young." His words felt like a distant wind, cold and dismissive. The humans exchanged glances, their captain, the one with the most direct authority, standing at the front of the delegation. Captain Amelia Grant was a sharp woman, well-versed in diplomacy, but even she felt the sting of the Arbiter's words. "We thank you for your generous invitation," she said, her voice steady despite the tension rising within her. "We stand ready to contribute to this council in any way that benefits all of us." But even as she spoke, the alien representatives around the table exchanged knowing glances, their eyes filled with judgment. They had seen species like humanity before, young, eager, and prone to overestimating their importance. They would be given a seat, sure, but that seat would be a mere token, a gesture, nothing more. The first meeting was largely uneventful. The humans were given little opportunity to speak. They were allotted a few minor issues to discuss, irrelevant matters about trade and resources that barely held any weight in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The rest of the council members spoke at length, discussing matters of far greater consequence with a sense of superiority that seemed to fill every corner of the chamber. By the time the meeting ended, the humans had barely uttered a word. They were dismissed with a few polite nods. As the doors of the council chamber closed behind them, Amelia felt the weight of the day's events settle in. The council had given them a seat, yes, but they had no intention of letting humanity be anything more than a footnote in galactic history. "They gave us a seat," Grant muttered under her breath, her gaze hardening. "But they don't realize what they've done." The human delegation left the council chamber in silence, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily on them. The long corridors of the alien station felt colder, more oppressive as they walked back to their quarters. Amelia Grant, the captain, could feel the stares of her colleagues, their faces a mix of disbelief and frustration. "They're laughing at us," one of her senior officers muttered, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. "We didn't even get a real chance to speak. They just wanted us to sit there, like children at the adults' table." Grant didn't respond right away. She had expected this, had known it would happen. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, and the established species had long since grown accustomed to their dominance. The council hadn't invited them as equals. It was an act of convenience, nothing more. The humans were just another species to be contained, another set of hands to be used for the council's convenience. But that wasn't how Amelia saw it. She had spent her entire life fighting for humanity's place among the stars. She had stood up to dangers far worse than this, and yet now she found herself sitting at the back of a table, ignored and belittled. It made her blood boil. Once they reached their quarters, Amelia walked to the small viewport and stared out into the vastness of space. The stars shimmered, distant and cold, like the promise of something far greater than this council could ever offer. Humanity was more than a seat at the table. They were more than pawns in someone else's game. "We can't let them treat us like this," she finally said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've earned our place here, but we're not going to be silent and compliant, not while they think they can walk all over us." Her senior officers gathered around, and for the first time since arriving on the alien station, there was a sense of unity between them. They weren't just going to sit back and accept their role as passive observers. Amelia knew they had to act, and they had to do it fast. If they didn't, they would fade into nothingness, just like the countless species who had been overlooked and cast aside by the council before them. "Do you remember what I said about humanity's potential?" Amelia asked, turning to her team. "We have the ability to surprise them, make them see us for what we really are. This isn't about getting a seat at their table. It's about flipping the table over." The officers exchanged looks, a mix of skepticism and awe. But there was something else too, something dangerous. A spark. One of them, Lieutenant Carter, a younger officer with a reputation for being idealistic, finally spoke up. "How do you suggest we do that, ma'am?" Amelia's lips curled into a determined smile. "We show them. We take action. And we make them regret ever thinking we were insignificant." As the rest of the team gathered around, the plan began to take shape. It was bold. It was dangerous. But it was humanity's only option now. Amelia knew they couldn't rely on diplomacy or goodwill anymore. The only language the council understood was power, and humanity would give it to them in spades. And so, in the shadows of that cold alien station, humanity's first real move was born. The days following their humiliating meeting with the Galactic Council were filled with a tense, simmering energy. Amelia Grant had spent every waking moment formulating a plan. An audacious one, far riskier than any diplomatic maneuver the Council had ever seen. It wasn't just about proving their worth. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would no longer be content with being dismissed as insignificant. By the time the Council's next scheduled session arrived, the human delegation was ready. Amelia had gathered her closest officers, each one a specialist in areas of strategy, technology, and intelligence, and they had crafted a plan designed to do one thing: disrupt the Council's status quo. It wasn't a grand gesture of destruction. It was something far more insidious, a sabotage of a galactic initiative that the Council was planning. "The Council is launching an interstellar trade route expansion," Amelia explained to her officers in a strategy room on the alien station. "It's supposed to secure resources and reinforce their power. But what they don't know is that one of the primary systems they're targeting houses a vulnerable, unprotected network, one that we can exploit." Lieutenant Carter, who had quickly proven himself to be a key player in the mission, looked skeptical. "So we infiltrate their trade routes? Disrupt their supplies?" "Not exactly," Amelia replied with a thin smile. "We target their communications and data networks just before they implement their expansion. We'll create a blackout. In the chaos that follows, we take their flagship, unscathed, but in a position where they're completely off guard." Her officers looked at her, their expressions ranging from disbelief to awe. Taking the flagship of the Council wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an outright declaration of war. And yet, Amelia's tone remained calm, assured. This wasn't just an act of anger. It was a calculated move designed to make the Council see humanity's value in a way that diplomacy never could. "We'll need precise timing and coordination," Captain Grant continued, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "The flagship's navigation system is one of the most advanced in the galaxy. We can't just rely on brute force. We need to outsmart them, make them believe we're nothing more than a minor nuisance, and then hit them where it hurts. The plan wasn't without its risks. If they failed, the repercussions would be catastrophic. The Council would turn their full might on humanity, and they would have no chance of surviving. But Amelia knew that the longer humanity allowed itself to be treated as inferior, the sooner they would be erased entirely. In the days that followed, the humans worked in secrecy, recruiting a small, hand-picked team to carry out the plan. They meticulously gathered intel, using the station's advanced surveillance systems to track the Council's movements. Each officer had a crucial role to play, ranging from infiltrating Council communications to preparing the necessary technology to disrupt their operations. The team was ready. The risk was enormous, but the stakes were higher than any of them had ever faced. And for the first time since arriving in the Council's presence, Amelia Grant felt the stirrings of something powerful, an undeniable sense that humanity's time had come. "We'll make them regret ever thinking we were too small to matter," she muttered to herself as she gazed out at the stars. "Let's show them just how wrong they are." With that, the plan to flip the table was set in motion. The night of the operation arrived swiftly. Amelia Grant stood on the bridge of the human vessel, her crew positioned at their posts, each one focused and silent. The vastness of space stretched out before them, the stars dimming as they neared the location of the Council's flagship. The operation was risky, bordering on reckless, but Amelia had made her decision. Humanity would no longer be dismissed. "We're in position, Captain," Lieutenant Carter reported, his fingers flying over the console in front of him. His voice was steady, though Amelia could sense the tension in him. It was palpable in every corner of the room. Amelia nodded, though her mind was miles ahead. The Council flagship, the Vanguard, was one of the most powerful ships in the galaxy, a symbol of the Council's strength and authority. It was supposed to be untouchable, protected by advanced shields and heavily armed. But Amelia's plan wasn't to attack it head-on. She learned from the Council's overconfidence, and it was that overconfidence they would use against them. "The first phase is complete," Carter said, a grin forming on his face. The human team had successfully breached the Council's communications and data networks, triggering a massive blackout. Without their usual stream of real-time intel, the Council was momentarily blinded. That's when the human team made their move. Amelia's crew swiftly infiltrated the flagship's defenses, using the chaos of the blackout to their advantage. The plan had been executed flawlessly so far. They'd breached the vessel's outer hull and infiltrated the heart of the ship, bypassing the advanced security systems with a mix of human ingenuity and calculated risk. A few hours later, the message was clear. The humans had taken control of the flagship. "Captain, we have it." Carter's voice crackled over the comms, excitement and disbelief in his tone. "The Vanguard is ours. The Council is, well, they're scrambling." Amelia's heart raced as she processed the news. The Council's most prestigious and powerful ship, now under their control. The operation had succeeded beyond her expectations, but as the crew cheered around her, a moment of clarity cut through the chaos. "What are we going to do with it?" Lieutenant Hanley, one of the senior officers, asked, his voice betraying a hint of unease. The question hung in the air for a long moment, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Amelia had been prepared for this. The capture of the Vanguard was not just a victory, it was a symbol, but it was also a message. They had just made an indelible mark on the galaxy, a mark that would echo across every corner of space. "We broadcast," Amelia said, her voice cold and commanding. "We broadcast our message to the entire galaxy. Let them know what happens when they underestimate humanity." The crew hesitated, uncertainty rippling through the ranks. It wasn't just about victory anymore. It was about the consequences of that victory. But Amelia knew there was no turning back. The galaxy would hear them now. As she moved toward the comm station, she looked back at her crew. Their faces were filled with a mix of excitement, fear, and anticipation. They had defied the odds. They had done what no one had ever dared to do. The broadcast was simple. The message clear. We are humanity. Amelia's voice rang out across the stars. And we will no longer be ignored. The galaxy held its breath. The broadcast had barely ended when the galaxy began to respond. The Council, in a state of utter chaos, scrambled to regain control of the Vanguard. But it was no use. The ship, once an untouchable symbol of their unchallenged power, was now in human hands. Across the stars, the implications of this unprecedented act rippled outward. News spread faster than the Council could contain it. Every communication channel, every data stream, every broadcast system carried the same simple, defiant message. We are humanity, and we will no longer be ignored. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council found itself questioning its authority. The stars didn't just belong to them anymore. The reactions from the Council's members were swift and predictable. A handful of powerful species, those who thrived on dominance and control, called for immediate retaliation. Military probes were launched, and entire fleets were mobilized in a show of force. But those who had always ruled with the threat of violence and intimidation underestimated one crucial thing: humanity's unpredictability. "Captain, they're moving in," Lieutenant Carter reported as he monitored the Council's fleet movements from the bridge. The fleet of ships surrounding the Vanguard was impressive, but it wasn't the size or firepower that worried Amelia. It was the anger behind the Council's retaliation. They were enraged, and when the Council was enraged, they often made mistakes. Amelia stood in front of the viewport, watching as distant ships began to align themselves for confrontation. She could almost feel the weight of the decisions before her, the consequences hanging heavy in the air. "We don't fight them head-on," Amelia declared, her voice firm. "We don't need to. We're going to show them that humanity can win the long game." She turned to her officers. "We've just made our mark. Now it's time to make alliances." The human delegation had played their cards, and they had made an impact. But the consequences of their actions were far-reaching, and the galaxy was quickly splintering into factions. On one side, the Council, furious and determined to reassert its dominance. On the other, the smaller, less powerful species who had long been oppressed by the Council, watching the humans with a new sense of hope. The first unexpected alliance came from the Otheri, a race of crystalline beings who had always been neutral in the Council's wars. The Otheri had quietly observed humanity's rise, unimpressed by the grandiose rhetoric of the Council. However, the humans' bold actions changed that. In the wake of the broadcast, a quiet message was sent from the Otheri. They wanted to meet. "I think they're ready to play a new game," Carter said, analyzing the encrypted message with a smile. Amelia didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what the Otheri represented: knowledge, subtlety, and influence. The Council feared them, and the fact that they were reaching out to humanity spoke volumes. "They've seen what we can do," Amelia replied, her expression cold. "And they're looking for allies who aren't afraid to break the old rules. We can't trust them entirely, but they'll help us tip the balance." With the Otheri in their corner, humanity had its first true ally among the galaxy's fractured factions. But Amelia knew that this was only the beginning. The Council wasn't going to back down easily, and neither would the other factions that would now begin to rally to humanity's side. This moment of opportunity would not last long, and the galaxy was already beginning to shift beneath their feet. But one thing was certain: humanity would no longer be a spectator in the galaxy's drama. Now, they were players, and they were ready to win. The alliance with the Otheri was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, Amelia Grant's once small and isolated group of human outcasts began to expand. The galaxy, it seemed, was ready to listen. Humanity's message had resonated, not only with the oppressed species who had long chafed under the Council's thumb, but with those who had once kept their distance from galactic politics altogether. The message had ignited something deep within the hearts of the lesser-known species, something they hadn't realized they had been waiting for: hope. The Otheri, as cryptic and aloof as they were, provided humanity with crucial intelligence. Their vast knowledge of the Council's inner workings and communications proved invaluable. With the Othari's help, Amelia and her crew began to build a network of contacts, smaller factions, independent systems, and old enemies of the Council. Each new ally added to humanity's growing strength, but it also drew the Council's ire even further. In the heart of the Galactic Council, a storm was brewing. The Council's high-ranking members convened in secret, each one a powerful and ancient entity, but now united by a singular purpose: to destroy the human threat before it could spread any further. "They've crossed a line," the Arbiter said, his voice low but filled with malice. The being's form, a constantly shifting mass of energy, hovered at the head of the table. "They've shattered the illusion of our invulnerability. The humans are an unpredictable force," one of the Council's other representatives, a hulking insectoid creature, growled. "Their audacity cannot be tolerated. We must crush them before their alliance grows." But not all members of the Council were so eager to jump into open war. A few of the more cautious factions, those who valued stability over dominance, suggested a more measured response. Yet the majority, led by the Arbiter, sought to eliminate the threat with overwhelming force. The Council had underestimated humanity before. They would not make the same mistake again. While the Council deliberated, the human delegation continued to prepare. Amelia knew time was running out. The Othari, cautious as they were, had provided them with critical information about the Council's military movements. The larger factions, confident in their power, were beginning to assemble fleets in preparation for an all-out assault. But what the Council didn't realize was that they were playing right into humanity's hands. "We have their movements," Carter said, his eyes glued to the console as he scanned the latest data. "They're assembling their forces in the outer sectors, close to the border systems. It's a classic strike formation." Amelia studied the holographic map. The Council's ships were converging in a way that would make them vulnerable, if humanity could act quickly enough. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Once their fleets are in position, we hit them with everything we've got," Amelia said, her voice calm but resolute. "The Othari are already moving into position. We'll strike fast, using their confidence against them." She could feel the tension in the room, the pressure building as each officer prepared for what would likely be their most dangerous mission yet. They had taken the vanguard without firing a single shot. Now, they would need to do the same again. But this time, it would be war. The storm was gathering, and it was going to break soon. But Amelia wasn't afraid. Humanity had already shown the galaxy what it was capable of. And now, it was time to prove they weren't going to be easily erased. It was time for the Council to see exactly who they were dealing with. The day of the operation arrived with an eerie sense of finality. The tension was so thick it could be felt in the air, as if the very fabric of the galaxy was holding its breath. Amelia Grant stood at the center of the command room aboard the Vanguard. Her crew gathered around, their faces a mix of determination and nerves. The time for hesitation had passed. The Council's fleets were in position, clustered near the outer systems, unaware of the trap that had been set for them. The human delegation, along with the Othari and other allies, were ready. It was a coordinated strike, swift, decisive, and precise. The plan was simple in its execution, but daring in its scope. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and failure was not an option. "Captain, all systems are green." "We're ready to move," Carter reported, his fingers dancing over the console, double-checking the data. His face was focused, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Amelia nodded, her eyes scanning the star map displayed on the holotable. "Let's remind them what happens when they underestimate us. Prepare the fleet. We move in 5 minutes." The alliance of human, Othari, and various smaller factions was not large in terms of numbers, but they were united by a singular goal: to tear down the Council's stranglehold on the galaxy. The Othari had positioned themselves as an invisible force, ready to disable the Council's communications and disrupt their fleet's coordination. The humans, armed with newly acquired intelligence, would strike at the heart of the Council's military formation, aiming to create chaos and confusion. Once the flagship was taken, it would be humanity's turn to command the battlefield. As the countdown began, Amelia felt a chill run through her. There was no turning back now. The Council had made their final mistake when they underestimated humanity's resolve. This attack was more than just a military operation. It was a declaration that humanity had come to stay. The first phase of the plan unfolded flawlessly. The Otheri launched a cyberstrike, taking down the Council's communication networks, plunging their fleets into disarray. Ships that had once moved with purpose and precision now floated aimlessly, vulnerable to the swift attacks that followed. A handful of smaller factions took advantage of the chaos, picking off the disoriented ships one by one. Phase 1 complete, Carter confirmed, his voice filled with excitement. The Council's fleets are in disarray. They're blinded. It's our moment. Amelia's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. Now, Phase 2. Strike their flagship. Let them know we're here. The human fleet, small but fiercely determined, moved in swiftly. The Council's flagship, once the symbol of their overwhelming dominance, now found itself surrounded. The once untouchable Vanguard was caught in a perfect trap, its advanced shields failing to hold up against the concentrated fire from humanity's ships. As the Vanguard fell into the trap, the Council members aboard the flagship scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The humans had come for the heart of their empire, and they were succeeding. The galaxy watched in awe as the once imposing Council fleet fell apart. It was the beginning of the end for their reign. Amelia's plan had worked better than she could have imagined. The Council was no longer a unified force. It was a fractured empire, shaken to its core by the audacity of the humans who had dared to challenge it. "Captain, their flagship is ours," Carter said, a note of triumph in his voice. "We've done it." But Amelia's expression remained serious. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was in chaos, and the Council would not surrender easily. There would be more battles to fight, more forces to rally. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had been given a new hope. Humanity had not only survived, they had struck a blow that would echo across the stars. And they were ready to finish what they had started. The silence that followed the fall of the Council's flagship was deafening. Amelia Grant stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching as the last remnants of the Council's fleet drifted in disarray. Their mighty empire, once the unchallenged ruler of the galaxy, was crumbling in real time. It was a victory beyond what Amelia had imagined, yet she felt no sense of triumph, only the weight of what lay ahead. "Captain, we've got full control of the flagship," Carter reported, his voice still buzzing with adrenaline. "We're in command of the Council's most powerful asset." Amelia nodded, her mind already shifting to the next step. "Good, but we don't hold this position for long if we don't act fast. Now, we send a message, not just to the Council, but to every system in this galaxy." Her eyes turned toward the viewports. Outside, the stars sparkled coldly, indifferent to the war raging between the old and the new powers of the galaxy. The Vanguard was humanity's symbol now, not just a weapon, but a symbol of defiance and strength. It was time to show the galaxy that humanity would not be dictated to, that they would no longer cower in the shadows of more ancient races. "Prepare the broadcast systems," she ordered. "It's time to speak to the galaxy." Within minutes, the Vanguard's communication systems were up and running, and Amelia stood before the central console, her crew gathered behind her. The message would go out to every corner of the galaxy, a declaration that the old order was no more. "Now," Amelia said softly, before turning to face the crew, "we take the next step. The Council's reign is over, but there's a lot of work to do to ensure the galaxy doesn't fall into chaos." She tapped a few keys, and the broadcast began. Her voice, calm and resolute, echoed through the void. reaching the ears of billions of beings across countless worlds. To the galaxy, she began, her words carrying the weight of history. Humanity has taken its place. We are no longer the silent spectators, no longer the unseen. We stand as equals in the galaxy, willing to fight, to build, and to lead where necessary. The crew on the bridge exchanged glances. It was not just a speech, it was a new reality, one that they were creating with their own hands. We do not seek dominance over others, Amelia continued, but we will not allow the oppression and inequality that the Council has imposed on so many to continue. This galaxy belongs to all its peoples, not just the few who think they can dictate its future. We will fight for freedom, for equality, for the right to determine our own destiny. The broadcast was short, powerful, and unyielding. Amelia's words were a challenge to the Council's old ways, but also a promise to those who had long suffered under their rule. Humanity had not only risen, it had declared that it would stand guard over the galaxy, fighting for the ideals of freedom and justice. As the broadcast ended, there was a long pause. Then, slowly, a ripple of communication flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. Some were skeptical, others terrified, and a few hopeful. But one thing was certain: humanity's message had been received. Back on the Vanguard, Amelia took a deep breath and turned toward her officers. Now, we rebuild. The Council may be broken, but we have no illusions about the work ahead. We will unite the galaxy, or we will die trying. The galaxy was fractured, but not beyond repair. New alliances would form, old wounds would heal, and new powers would rise. And humanity would be at the forefront, leading the charge toward a new, better future. The stars were no longer just a place to explore. They were now humanity's domain to protect, shape, and defend. The rise of a new order had begun.